So now I'm going to talk about intermolecular forces, which are the forces of attraction that molecules have to each other. And we'll see that they have a great effect on lots of properties. So intra versus intermolecular forces, a little bit of definition. Intramolecular forces are bonds, and those hold the atoms together. Intermolecular forces are attraction between molecules, and sometimes we call these bonds, but they're not. They are definitely just forces of attraction between atoms or between molecules. The first IMF, or intermolecular force, is ion dipole. It is the strongest because it has actual charges, ions with full charges. The higher the charges, the higher the force is. And in this case, the best example of an ion dipole is when you put something in solution, ionic compound like sodium chloride, it dissolves, and what happens is the chloride is attracted to the positive side of the water, the hydrogen side, and the sodium is attracted. And the sodium is attracted to the oxygen side of the water, which is the negative end. So it's the attraction between an ion and then a polar solvent, and that solvent is usually water. It is the strongest IMF. Alright, the next intermolecular force is dipole-dipole. Sometimes they're just called plain old dipole forces. And these are the forces of attraction when two polar molecules are attracted to each other. The positive end is attracted to the negative end of another molecule. So examples are HCl up here, where the negative chlorine is attracted to a hydrogen on a nearby molecule. And this is drawn with a line, but it is not a bond. It's an attractive force. Sometimes we draw the attractions with dotted lines to show that they are not bonds. So the delta plus is attracted to the delta minus next door. So hydrogen bonds are a special type of dipole-dipole attraction that happens between when a hydrogen is attached to a really electronegative atom, and those can be oxygen or nitrogen or fluorine. Oxygen and nitrogen are the most common. Fluorine is not so common. So they make a really strong dipole-dipole attraction. And it's so strong and it's so special that it gets a special name, and we call it hydrogen bond, which is a little bit unfortunate because it is actually not a bond. It's the force of attraction between this hydrogen here. This hydrogen has to be attached to oxygen, nitrogen, or fluorine, and in this case it's attached to oxygen in water. And this hydrogen here is attracted to an oxygen on a separate atom, and this attraction is a hydrogen bond because it involves hydrogen. But the hydrogen has to be attached to oxygen or nitrogen or fluorine. So it's really important to be able to figure out if molecules are going to make hydrogen bonds or not, because they're so strong and because they're so important. So in order to do this, sometimes you need to draw it out and figure out what the hydrogens are attached to. And sometimes you can tell. And if the hydrogen is attached to those three atoms, it can make hydrogen bonds. So go through and on each of these sets, figure out if each molecule can do hydrogen bonding. Stop and go through and figure them out, and then turn it back on and check and see how you did. Okay, so notice, don't just see hydrogens and think, oh, of course it can hydrogen bond because it has hydrogens. These hydrogens are all attached to carbons, so no, it cannot hydrogen bond. On this hand, this molecule, this hydrogen here, is attached to an oxygen, so yes, it can hydrogen bond. Note that these hydrogens over here cannot hydrogen bond. And again, hydrogens attached to nitrogen, yes, they can hydrogen bond. Again, hydrogen attached to oxygen, yes. Hydrogen attached to an oxygen, And then in this case, it has hydrogens and it has oxygen, but they're not bonded together. So no, this cannot hydrogen bond. So just some examples of where hydrogen bonding is really important. DNA in biology, you've got the double-stranded DNA, and they're actually attached to each other using hydrogen bonds. So again, they're very weak. They're not bonds, they're intermolecular forces of attraction. But because there are so many of them, they join up into the double helix that we all know. There are millions and millions of hydrogen bonds in a double helix. Hydrogen bonding is also really important in proteins. When they fold up to make either alpha helixes or a beta sheet, the folding, the attraction that keeps them together are the little dotted lines here, and those are hydrogen bonds. Notice that proteins and DNA, they have a lot of hydrogens attached to nitrogens, and hydrogens attached to oxygens. So they can do a lot of hydrogen bonding. So when you get the complex protein folded up structures, they are the folding and the structures is due to these hydrogen bonds. Okay, the last and the weakest IMF is dispersion forces, sometimes called London dispersion forces, although most books just have dropped the word London. And what this is, these are the hardest ones to understand. They're the weakest intermolecular force. And what happens is in each particle, in each molecule or particle, there are always shifting electrons. So the electrons move around and they shift. And as they shift, they cause what we call is an induced dipole, which means very, very briefly, there's more electrons on one side than the other, and there's a tiny little polarity arrow which is moving all the time, and it's very, very small, and it's very, very weak. But this shifting means that one side is really briefly more electronegative, and it's attracted to the protons, or the positive side of another particle. And so we draw it with a little dotted line here to show this attraction. Another way to think about it is the electrons in one particle or one molecule are attracted to the nucleus of another. It's very, very small and it's very, very weak. They are present in every single molecule. So if it has electrons, it has dispersion forces. However, we only talk about them when the molecules are nonpolar. They are the only intermolecular force that is present. So it's the only thing that attracts them together is dispersion forces. So when we talk about them, we always talk about them in relationship with nonpolar molecules because these molecules have no other IMFs. Dispersion forces are increased with larger size and higher molar mass, which makes sense because there are more protons, more electrons, so the forces are stronger, and that's why as you increase the molar mass, the boiling point and the melting point is going to increase. Another thing that's affected, that affects dispersion forces is branching. So if we look at these molecules, they both have the same formula and the same molar mass. They are isomers of each other. We've just moved things around. So they both have 4 carbons and 10 hydrogens. But in one case, all the carbons are in a straight line, and in the other case, there's 1 carbon attached to 3 other carbons. So the structure is a little bit different. This one down here has more what we call branching, and with branching, it has decreased surface area, and that weakens dispersion forces because they don't have as much contact with each other. So that's why with branching, the boiling point increases because the particles are not as attracted to each other.